What can you get away with if you've been a French president? Second verdict, second conviction for former leader Nicolas Sarkozy, guilty of spending nearly twice the limit on his failed 2012 re-election bid. With two other cases pending, questions abound surrounding the one-term conservative and the strength of France's judicial system. Does the punishment fit the crime? Sarkozy, the first ever former French president, handed what's called a custodial sentence, but he won't be doing hard jail time. If the ruling's upheld on appeal, it'll be 1 year under house arrest with an electronic bracelet. Even though he spent the last decade out of office and mostly embroiled in legal battles, why does Sarkozy still enjoy such a loyal following within the French right? And why, despite a conviction for bribing a judge and their allegations of campaign financing by Muammar Gaddafi, does he get to whisper in the ear of current president, the centrist Emmanuel Macron? More broadly, how much deference for former heads of state? This in a nation which guillotined a king, but boasts the EU's only constitution where the president enjoys outsized powers. With another presidential election campaign just around the corner, what does this conviction say about France and its institutions? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if the punishment fits the crime for Nicolas Sarkozy. And joining us, Aurélie Fontcave, representative for Sarkozy's Les Républicains party in Germany. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. A pleasure being with you.
From Marseillan on the southern coast of France, Laurent Dublé, communications director for the anti-corruption campaigners at Anticorps. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Attorney William Julier is with us. Nice to see you.
Good evening.
And Bruno Cotres, who heads Cevipof. That's the research wing of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. It's called the Pygmalion affair. Pygmalion, the ad agency that handled Nicolas Sarkozy's re-election campaign in 2012. James Vizina has more.
7 years after the suspicions first arose, Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to a year in jail, a conviction which he'll be allowed to spend at home with an electronic tag. It's a tougher sentence than the 6 months requested by the prosecutors. The former French president, who wasn't present for the ruling, has always denied the allegations.
President
Sarkozy, with whom I spoke on the phone just now, asked me to appeal, which I will do immediately when I leave. The Court of Appeal will rule on it, and we will then have the opportunity to discuss it again.
But the court has found him guilty of overspending.
Nicolas Sarkozy knew about the legal limits. This wasn't his first campaign, and he knows the law well. Furthermore, he'd received 2 written warnings that he was close to overspending. Nicolas Sarkozy continued to organize rallies on the same scale as before.
Vive la République et vive la France!
Lagging behind in opinion polls, Sarkozy's team spent at least €42 million on a series of major rallies, hoping he'd serve a second mandate in 2012. That's almost twice the legal amount. The PR company known as Pygmalion, hired by the right-wing party, used fake invoices to conceal the real price of the events. Sarkozy has been involved in a number of court cases since he stepped down as president. In March, he received a 3-year prison sentence in a wiretapping case, with 2 years suspended. He's also under formal investigation in a case alleging he'd received millions of euros from late dictator Muammar Gaddafi for his first election campaign in 2007.
Bruno Cotres, let's wind the clock back 9.5 years. Nicolas Sarkozy had been trailing in the campaign against François Hollande, the socialist candidate, but he was narrowing the gap, and we did see those rallies late in the campaign.
Yes, that's true that Nicolas Sarkozy was not so far from re-election.
He almost won.
Yes, but he did a campaign that was quite a difficult one anyway, because the hate of Sarkozy was amazingly high in many parts of the French electorate. And the image of Nicolas Sarkozy at the end of its mandate is not at all the same as in the beginning. Let's recall the beginnings in 2007, when the young Sarkozy, only age 52, looks someone absolutely energetic, unbeatable. Nicolas Sarkozy, which have a new modern interpretation of the French presidency, the young guy, which is going to give to the right wing a true right wing guy. Let's remember that when Sarkozy got elected, he managed to lower the Front National voting to only 10%, facing security, immigration. So obviously, in the right-wing camp today, Nicolas Sarkozy, the last right-wing president, there is still a legend of Sarkozy that he may come back one of these days. I think it's absolutely over, but it's part of the legend of Sarkozy.
All right, we'll talk about the legend of Sarkozy more in a moment. William Julier, this verdict, as we saw in that report, he gets a year's suspended sentence, same as last time. The difference is, two differences actually. The first is it's for crimes committed while he was in office, which is a first, right? Mm-hmm. And the second one being that he gets a stiffer sentence than what the prosecution wanted. Were you surprised?
Not surprised. One never knows what's going to come out, but we knew that the trial had been tough on him. Then he is going to appeal, apparently, against the decision. So we don't know what's going to happen on appeal, if his sentence is going to be confirmed or not. But there had been a lot of witnesses and co-defendants who had spoken in very difficult terms for him. So we were expecting that he was maybe going to be sentenced, and he did get the maximum sentence because he had been indicted and he was prosecuted for an offence which was a maximum of 1 year.
Why did the judges go for a harsher sentence than what the prosecution wanted?
They considered that, first of all, he had not been there every day during the trial, and maybe that also weighed in the decision. They considered that maybe...
Because for an Anglo-Saxon audience, the optics of the defendant not being there the day of the ruling is a bit unusual, no?
In France, you cannot be there at all. You can be represented by your lawyer from day one to day of the end. He did only come once when it was his day to be interviewed, and then he did not show up again. And I do think that maybe the court did not appreciate that too much.
Is this... let's look at some reactions here. Candidates from Sarkozy's camp in next April's presidential election, quick to rush to his defense. His former health minister, Xavier Bertrand, who's vying for the endorsement of Sarkozy's party, tweeting, in these circumstances that are so hard from him, he can count on my support. My wish is for the truth to come out in his appeal. The truth to come out in his appeal. Let me ask you, Aurélie Fontcave, has the truth not come out during this trial?
Well, I will not comment on a court decision and on an ongoing case, especially since, as you reminded it, the defendants have just appealed. Indeed, Nicolas Sarkozy has said he would appeal, so the sentence is not final. Maybe a few observations. As you reminded it, the Republican Party has renewed its support for Nicolas Sarkozy. A statement from President Jacob has been released. Some of the key representatives of the Republicans, such as Agnès Evren, Gilles Platré, have also expressed their support. And this outpouring of support goes well beyond the circle of the Republicans. For instance, Valérie Pécresse has expressed her support. I'm seeing very few comments from the current representative of the government. I trust that this is maybe also a sign that current government officials or ex-officials are being under scrutiny for other cases. So there is a certain discretion from l'AREM, and the same observation can be made as well for the other parties. So.
And is that support that you describe a support for the man that you're fond of, or is it a support in the face of what he branded or has branded often as a political vendetta, these trials?
Well, I think that, and this is the expression of the legend of Nicolas Sarkozy is very true. Even if Sarkozy is out of the game, he has retained a very strong aura. And the best example that I can give you is that many of the candidates for the presidential are still looking for Sarkozy's endorsement. So his endorsement is still hardly coveted by many. Another example that I can give you is the craze around these literary releases, and shows the affection that the French and the right-wing people still have for President Sarkozy. So I think that this conviction won't have a strong impact on the popularity of Nicolas Sarkozy.
Laurent Dublet, before I ask you about the jurisprudence here with this second conviction for Sarkozy, just a quick reaction to the popularity within his own camp, despite these two convictions now.
Just one thing. What I hear from Mr. Bertrand is quite dramatic. It's once again an attack against justice, and it's very difficult to hear that. And about the so-called popularity of Mr. Sarkozy, I would like to remind one thing. In 2017, Mr. Sarkozy lose the primary in its own party. So we can't consider that Mr. Sarkozy is that much popular, and which justify to attack once again a justice decision.
He's the second French president to be convicted. Jacques Chirac in 2011, long after he was no longer in power. This was over a scandal over kickbacks with housing that had to do when he was mayor of Paris. So it was a case that was decades old, in fact. In this particular case, today's ruling is different, is it not? Because of the fact that these are for facts that happened while he was president of France.
Well, it's the first time. The difference is that Mr. Chirac was condemned for about things about when he was mayor of Paris. Mr. Sarkozy is condemned on the basis of not respecting the law for financing electoral campaign, which is very different. And it's the first time that a French president is condemned on that basis. And it's very interesting because we see, at Anticor, we did realize that many of the campaigns were not legal. The financing of the campaign were not legal. And it's the first time that we see the justice taking a decision about that subject.
But there had been convictions over illicit campaign financing in which there were convictions surrounding the re-election of François Mitterrand. There were convictions in Jacques Chirac's entourage. What makes this different?
I didn't get you, sorry.
There have been previous campaign financing convictions. There have been many of them in the history of the Fifth Republic. What makes this one different this time?
No, because the proceeding is that when it's quite complicated. Every candidate has to deposit his account of the campaign, and the Conseil constitutionnel never reject some.
Never rejected the final sheet of the finances.
Exactly, and it's the first time that the justice say, well, this campaign was illegal.
Right, so that was a first. So is it a turning point for France? Is France does that mean the justice system works?
Well, it's a first step. We will see what will happen next, because at Anticor for the election of 2017, we did we did send. Well, I don't know how to say that. We did send we did signal the account of campaign of many candidates, and none of them were sued.
None of them were sued. Bruno Cotres, there's a wider problem with campaign financing. But in the case particularly here of Nicolas Sarkozy, you just heard Laurent Dublé criticize that tweet by current candidate Xavier Bertrand. It's saying, once again, it's an attack on the judiciary.
I think that we have to consider two things. One thing is the political support, which is most of the time very natural in this kind of situation, despite that the relationship between Sarkozy and Xavier Bertrand are not the best friends, I would say so. But there is a political logic, which is there, and also Xavier Bertrand is
neither, as Aurélie Fontcave mentioned, neither is the current president of the Paris region, Valérie Pécresse, who's also running.
Yes, and Bertrand is running for the presidency, so also it needs the support of the Républicains activists. Obviously, there is a second aspect of the story, which is, yes, it's true that progressively in France, the question of anti-corruption, the question of a clean political life is getting more and more and more important. You can see that through the legislations. You could see that also through the different aspects of the political lives in France. They are caring much more than before about the financing of their campaigns. It's true that we have a subject. We have something to say about financing the campaign in France. You know that companies cannot donate money. It's only personal individuals that can give money to the candidates. I think it's a good thing, but more and more politics cost. Doing a good campaign costs a lot.
So small donations don't do it. William Julet, are we entering a new era of transparency?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of things in this Sarkozy decision and case. One of the big movements which is deploying here is more compliance. We see a lot about compliance doing with corruption. We see a lot of compliance coming up with human rights. This is about big companies. It's about political life. And this is also about compliance with campaigning, fair competition, the fact that everybody needs to campaign with the same means and the same rules.
I think the bar right now is something like 7,000 something euros maximum. Is that unrealistic? Is it too?
What I think is important is that everybody has to abide to the same rules. And I do think that there's more and more compliance, and that is a good thing. On another side, there's another movement, which is that alongside this compliance and the work being done by the judges, by the PNF, etc., these political cases are also being used as weapons by other political entities. We saw that with François Fillon. It is being used now, I reckon, by some people against Sarkozy, and now everybody is saying Sarkozy had lunch with Macron. What does that mean? Are we talking about future alliances? Is it still possible to have these alliances being spoken about during a meeting when we've got these convictions going on? So I think these are very complex issues. There's the compliance, but there's also all the political using of these cases, and that is also something that I think needs to be put into the general thinking.
Yeah, the relations between Nicolas Sarkozy and the current French president, something we'll be talking about when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. A formal investigation against the former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, in 4 cases. He's now had 2 convictions, including this Thursday, the news that over his overspending in his failed 2012 re-election bid, he will have to spend 1 year under house arrest with an electronic bracelet. He's appealing. We're talking about with Aurélie Fontcave. representative for Sarkozy's Les Républicains party in Germany. From Marseillan in southern France, Laurent Dublé, communications director for the anti-corruption campaigners Anticorps. Attorney William Julet is with us, and Bruno Cotres of the research wing Cevipof of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. So two cases where there's been verdicts, two more to come. And we got to say, it's perhaps the biggest one that still lies ahead. Eyebrows were raised in December of 2007 when Muammar Gaddafi came to town, Libya's then leader, pitching up his Bedouin tent at the presidential palace's guest house across the street from the Élysée Palace. It was during a state visit. Sarkozy's entourage answered critics, saying it was all in the higher interest of France. Paris, which made an ultimately unsuccessful pitch at the time to sell Rafale fighter jets to the Libyans. That was before the French and the British led the charge to have Gaddafi ousted during the 2011 Arab Spring. Here we see Sarkozy with then Prime Minister David Cameron in Tripoli for a victory lap. This a few months before claims surfaced that Gaddafi had bankrolled Sarkozy's 2007 campaign to the tune of 50 million euros. Laurent Dublé, is that the big one? Is that the big trial still to come?
Well, yes. Yes, I think it will be much bigger than this current condemnation of Mr. Sarkozy.
And your thoughts on, when you look back now at the war in Libya, how does this inform your view of it?
I didn't hear you, sorry.
How does the revelations that were put forth by the French media Mediapart, and again, we haven't had a ruling yet, but the allegations, how do they inform your view of France's take-charge role in ousting Gaddafi?
I didn't hear you, sorry, so the connection is very bad.
Okay. I was asking if you thought that perhaps money owed was a reason or not in Sarkozy's decision to lead the invasion of Libya? All right, we'll try to go back to Laurent Dublé. I'll put it to you, Aurélie Fontcave. With hindsight, the invasion of Libya, was there a personal stake in it? Aurélie Fontcave, can you hear us?
Personal stake. Well, I think that the President Sarkozy has expressed quite clearly in which context the visit of Muammar Gaddafi took place. You remember the story of the Bulgarian nurses that were retained in Libya. So there is the whole certain context around this visit. I don't have any further comment to make on that. I think this is history now.
All right. Well, even with the legal wagons circling around him, Sarkozy did launch, as Laurent Dublé mentioned, that unsuccessful bid to capture his party's nomination for president. This was back in 2016.
Throughout this campaign, I've wanted to say the truth. The truth about the situation of this country, about the challenges that we'll face, and about the solutions that I can offer for France. I've been fully transparent. No detours, no games, and no denying the reality.
I've been fully transparent. Bruno Cotres, you talk about him as a polarizing figure. For his supporters, when he makes a statement like that, does that make him, I guess you would call, a lovable rogue?
Probably yes. Yes. You know that the relationship of Sarkozy with the judges have been always tough, very difficult. Actually, I would even say that if Sarkozy won't face accusations, prosecutions, it is no longer the Sarkozy that we know. Sarkozy is in a constant battle against the judges. It permits to Sarkozy to reactivate the legend of Sarkozy, the victim of a vendetta, from the judges. So I would say...
And is part of that appeal the fact that he didn't go to those fancy schools that most French presidents go to? He went to a normal university.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And Sarkozy, even when he was just elected, he was like someone who actually did not follow exactly the same political trajectory as the other ones. He has to fight against Jacques Chirac at one stage. Then he won the presidency, and all over the presidency there was constant fight between Sarkozy and the judges. He did some mocking declarations about the judges. He was naming the judges like green peas that you can push away or that you can. Okay, so the relationship of Sarkozy with justice and with the judges have been always very tough, very difficult, and so it permits Sarkozy to activate that he is the victim of a revenge of the justice system, and it's because of that still supporters of Sarkozy continue to support him, not only because he used to be the president, he's the last right-wing president to have been elected in France, but also the core of the supporter believe that he's a victim, actually, that many other politicians are doing much more, much worse, but do not receive condemnations.
Aurélie Fontcave, what do you find appealing in Nicolas Sarkozy?
Well, I think as President Jacob has reminded it,
The head of the party.
Come again?
Christian Jacob, the head of the party, just to remind her.
Exactly, the head of the party. We are proud of President Sarkozy. He did a fantastic job in handling the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. He, as you mentioned, he was very close to get a second mandate. And it's also the last time that the Republican Party was in power. So there is a whole nostalgia about this time. I think that people like the fact that President Sarkozy has always been very close to the political activists. And he has retained a very, very positive image, and the craze around his books shows that people still have for him a strong empathy, a strong affection.
Strong affection within the party, but as Bruno Cotresse was saying, William Julier, a polarizing figure for the French. Do they look at this chapter today as kind of history, a reminder of a time that was? It's now been, 15 years since he was elected?
I think both, actually. I think Sarkozy was also about being a showman. He was a bit like we had Éric Dupond-Moretti, and he became
the justice
minister, and he was a showman as a lawyer. Sarkozy is a lawyer, actually. And I think we had someone who attracted the crowds, who did the show. And he was not the first one in France, but he was one of the first to do it maybe a bit the American way, attracting a lot of hate and attracting a lot also of people loving him. And I think that maybe this is also what is causing all the fuss. Maybe it would have happened if he had not been as much a showman, but I do think it is connected.
Now, his relationship with the current president has been hot and cold, but at times, Emmanuel Macron has used him as an advisor. And we know that he has now as his interior minister a former spokesperson for Sarkozy.
Yep, so absolutely. That was what I was pointing at a minute ago.
What does Emmanuel Macron, you think, see in Nicolas Sarkozy?
I think that Emmanuel Macron is very smart, and I think that he understands that as it is, Sarkozy is still a player, maybe not in the election, but is still a player in the French political game. And this is why I reckon he had lunch or dinner, I can't remember, with him, not a long time ago, because I think that he knows that Sarkozy can weigh, even, this was before this last conviction, but even with the first conviction that you mentioned, that he can still weigh in what is going to happen maybe after the first round, including what is going to happen if Sarkozy says, OK, I'm going with Macron. I read that maybe there could be a kind of alliance where Sarkozy would say he goes with Macron, and then he would maybe have a word in the next Premier Ministre.
Laurent Dublé, what are your thoughts on Emmanuel Macron and Nicolas Sarkozy being in touch with one another? They're not from the same political family. One is a centrist, the other is from a harder right. And yet they're in touch, even though we all saw these convictions coming. We know there could be two more. Your thoughts on this?
Well, we at Anticorps, we don't take any position about the relationship between Mr. Macron and Mr. Sarkozy. It's not a problem. But in fact, that if the condemnation of Mr. Sarkozy is confirmed, having some tight link with from a French president with a condemned person for corruption, for illegally financing electoral campaign, it's kind of a problem. And I would like to add something. I heard about the sympathy, about the support, the affection that many people have towards Mr. Sarkozy. But the person who say that shouldn't forget that a recent poll say that 80% of the young people between the age of 18 and 30 think that our politicians are not honest, and 83% think that politics is not an interesting thing, and they do not want to participate in it.
You've made the perfect segue to our next topic, which is whether or not this case strengthens or weakens French institutions. Now, every year, Cevipof does a giant survey, right, to measure how the French feel about politics and their institutions. This is the last one. I think it's from February. And you asked lots of questions, but there was this one. Would you say that the democracy in France works very well, not very well at all? Well, basically, there's only like 42% of the French who think that it's working well.
Yes, and it goes better than 2-3 years ago. Actually, it is one of the questions that we are asking, which goes better since the beginnings of the mandate of Emmanuel Macron. There are very few.
And by the way, with similar questions,
exactly
only Italy ranks worse than France when it comes to distrust of their politicians.
Absolutely, yes. Even Macron didn't succeed in facing the political trust crisis in France, which is just amazing. We are probably among the countries in Europe where the political distrust, where democratic dissatisfaction is at the top in France. And so obviously we have mixed feelings with the case of Sarkozy. On one side, he's going obviously to add one more coin to that story, which is you can't trust politicians. They are liars, corrupted. They are selfish person. They just think about their own interest. They take your vote and then they don't do anything for you. And on the other side, to see democratic institutions that function, that sanction, for the former president, like for anyone, I think it's good. We all know that if we are breaking the rules, we will receive sanctions. And it's good to repeat, and it's good that the institution recalls to the citizens that anyone,
of course, I mentioned Italy, but contrary to Italy, where you've had former prime ministers go to jail, or in one case skip jail and go into exile, in France, the position is not of prime minister, it's of president. It's a more powerful position.
It's very powerful, actually. The French president is really a strong executive. And not only the French president is a strong executive, but he's the head of the state. He nominates the prime minister. So the prime minister cannot substitute to the president. If you demolish the president, we need to change the political regime of France. Some people are telling that we should do so, that we should end with a strong presidency. I'm not sure that the French would like that.
Aurélie Foncave, every 5 years when we have a presidential election, that's one of the topics that comes up. Is this constitution give too much power to the president? It makes it difficult to call out when they've abused that power. Do you like the way the system is set up right now, or do you think that the president should have less power?
You know, the system is basically two-headed. It's both a parliamentary system and a presidential system. So the best example of it is the cohabitation period that we have had under the Fifth Republic. So the constitutional power may appear to be extensive, but they are limited by the law. They are limited by the counterpowers. It also basically depends on the occupant of the position. So I would not say that it gives too much power to the president, even if we have seen, especially during the COVID period, that President Macron has found ways to sometimes go beyond what we have in the past seen in terms of power being used.
Do you agree, William Julier?
Yeah, I do. What I would like to add is I think what is at stake here also is that we have emerging judicial power as a counterpower more and more important. There were times where judges did not fiddle with politics, and now judicial power is growing stronger and stronger. We know what the PNF is doing in terms of
just explain to our viewers the PNF
is the Parquet National Financier,
which is the
specialized prosecution,
which investigates financial wrongdoing.
Absolutely, and doing a lot of what we call des affaires politico-financières. So this is changing the lines, and we also have the media, and the media is changing the lines. A couple of these cases we're talking about got started with media investigation work, and also with the work being done by les associations, by NGOs, by Anticorps, Sherpa and other associations. And I think that all this is making the game more complex. And I do think that my personal view is that the democracy actually works also thanks to these powers, which are not only l'exécutif and politicians, but also the media, also the judicial power. And I think that all that is making the game more complex, but somehow maybe more functional.
So, Laurent Dublet, on the one hand, you've had what you just heard from William Julier, organizations like yours that have been putting on the pressure, investigations which have called out abuse of power. On the other hand, we've had, rule by decree, first when there were the terror attacks, and then to a lesser degree when there was the COVID pandemic. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with William Julier that French democracy is perhaps strengthening right now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if it's strengthening, but I'm going to talk about the separation of power. And in France, if we look at the justice power, it's totally underfinanced. It has the lowest budget in the European Union. And we have a lack of judges and magistrates in France. Talking about the PNF and the number of magistrates in this institution, it's too low. And the justice is totally underfinanced. We have another problem talking about the independence of justice. It's the lack of independence of procureurs, which are receiving orders from the executive power. So we can't say that the French democracy is strengthening if the separation of power is not ensured.
Bruno Cotres, a final word on this?
Yes, I think that we have a big issue in France, which is to make our political system, even if we keep the Fifth Republic as it is, with more democratic control. But it applies also to justice. You need to remember that when the beginnings of the bad relationship between Sarkozy and the judges was when Sarkozy started to say, if the judges are dysfunctioning, they should receive tougher administrative sanctions. And that was in the period of a case that was perturbating a lot French public, l'affaire Doutreau, with a complete dysfunctioning of justice.
Yeah, pedophilia ring in the north of France.
So we need to give more means to justice, obviously, but the question of making justice easier, closer, more transparent for the citizens is also a big issue. When we are doing the survey you were mentioning, we are measuring trust in different institutions. People have more trust in police than justice today in France.
More trust in the police than in the justice system.
Yes.
Something to think about on the campaign trail. A campaign trail that's a campaign that's only just kicking off for French President. Bruno Cotres, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well William Julier, Laurent Dublet for joining us from Marseillan, Aurélie Fontcave in Paris. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.